Welcome to Praise, Prayer and Preaching with the Rev Dr Keith Garner.
On this Sunday here in Wesley Mission in Sydney, we recognise the importance of individuals as volunteers. We recognise within the own orbit and arena of our work here at Wesley Mission that something like 4,000 people are engaged regularly in volunteering week by week. And the variety of expressions of volunteering is ever widening. There are the obvious areas of our work, preparing for worship and serving in congregations. But there's the mentoring of young people, the caring of children, the running cafes in aged care facilities and helping the homeless, assisting in helping auditing in areas where volunteers are needed to help the local service to be able to continue, and making our services more effective. And volunteering that is carried out in a variety of different ways, some regularly, some occasionally, and some over a period of time. Vocation is something that Christians understand because it is almost second nature to us. We see the roots of our understanding of vocation in a Christian context. Volunteering runs very naturally out of a tradition and way where offering what we do with our lives is seen a way of serving. But it's not necessarily the same as call. Many people are involved in volunteering in our wider community. But we identify also the lasting difference that caring in this way can bring to people's lives, offering ourselves in a way that says, as different opportunities emerge within our community, within our society, we step into the breach and we offer that which is our service. Since the Reformation across the world, there's been a great resistance to what we call dualism. That kind of way in which we separate God's work and God's way from our daily lives, almost talking about a religious life and a non-religious life. We resist that because we believe somehow that what we do and see in our ordinary everyday lives is linked vitally to what it means for us to be Christians. We unite them. And the New Testament never sees secular occupation as vocation, but lives that are vocation as they're offered together. When I look very carefully at our response as Christians, it is what we do day by day that best exemplifies, demonstrates, and witnesses to what it means to be Christian. A most graphic picture is painted for us in the Old Testament book of Samuel. It's a story of Samuel in the temple. We're told, and the chapter opens up very helpfully, this was a time when there were very few visions. This was a time when people heard very little from God. Now, that doesn't mean to say that they didn't believe in God. It doesn't mean to say that there is no religious context for that scripture, but it puts it into a very distinct context. And it's in that context that the wonderful call of the boy Samuel, who is later to be a prophet and leader, is made. God's persistence is very real in the passage. How often when people read this passage, which has this marvelous story of the boy listening and hearing a voice and keeps going to Eli, the old man in the temple, and say, "You called me, you shouted out to me." He says, "No, I didn't shout out to you." So often we put all the emphasis upon the boy being the one who continues to listen. What about putting the emphasis for just a moment on the persistence of God? How God persists in calling people at different stages of their lives. Look back at your own life for just a moment. If you belong to Jesus Christ and you live the Christian life, there are times in which you say, "Well, gosh, God was speaking to me, but I wasn't listening." Or God was speaking and I didn't really hear what it was he was actually saying to me. And the call demonstrates the passing from childhood to adult life, in a sense. You know, there was no such thing as a passing in quite the way. That's why the bar mitzvah, the boy becoming a man within Jewish culture, is so very important. There were no teenagers in the Bible, you know. In fact, there was no teenagers till about the mid-1950s, you know. No, don't you tell me any different, those that were older. It's like a different stage of life. But here's a story of a boy that is changed and is starting to become a man. as he hears the attentiveness in his spirit to whatever it was that God was saying to him. Until now, he appears rather passive, but emerges eventually to be a prophet. His priestly functions are now directed to something different because it all happens in the temple. These were people who worked in the temple, who knew what it was to prepare for service, who knew what it was to be about religious duties. But his religious duties would eventually become a prophetic duty, something far more dramatic. And responding to the call of God for Samuel and for us requires action and recognition of what lies ahead. In the familiar story of the call of Samuel, a good deal of attention is given to the boy's experience, but it's actually about the call of God. And while tonight we properly and really, in this context, offer the importance of volunteering within our community, we recognize that it is a very real need. The need that exists to support so many things that would just go by the wall were it not for volunteers in our community. This occurs in this biblical context while Samuel is keeping vigil beside or near to the ark of the temple. He reveals his innocence by mistaking the voice of God for that of his old dear friend. And it's in this setting we hear his simple affirmation of trust. Speak, for your servant is listening. Many good books have been written on the theme of God's calling in our lives. And for every individual, there's a sense of in about call. You know, people hear a call, a vocation, an understanding to do something in so many different ways. Some hear it in a moment, almost epiphany-like, a moment in which they become aware of something, of the otherness of life, Otto's otherness. Yes, they hear it in that way. Many people respond to it because of a need that emerges. And we say, what's going to happen with this need? Who's going to step into that place to meet that need? Other people hear it as they respond to friends. How many people become volunteers within our own organization because they hear somebody else doing it? They say, that's something I could do. That's something you could do. Because there's different ways of hearing that. Samuel received his calling through an audible voice, even when at first he didn't recognize it. The message he received had all the power of what Joyce Baldwin called the direct force of truth, to which she concluded, but final verification that he'd heard the voice of God would only come later, when events vindicated God's word. And you know, when we're called to do something, when we respond to something and we offer ourselves, the flavor is there when you eat it. Not when you design it, when you actually taste it. And so the reality of calling comes out. The proof of the pudding, we say in that old saying. The truth is, as we do and as we are and as we demonstrate. You see, this calling for this young boy would test his strength. And strength in Samuel is a very interesting theme in itself. It would challenge his resolve, and it would prove his character. All these things constitute what it means to respond. And the theme of responding to God's call in various ways is replicated throughout Scripture and in the story of the church. Walter Brueggemann, fantastic on the Old Testament, draws attention to the fact that this innocent-looking narrative functions in the context of a serious struggle for power later. So what begins as a very innocent story will become a momentous story. How many acts of volunteering lead to something far more that they never, ever imagined they would? We must ensure, I think, that we don't allow this idyllic story that became an old hymn in Victorian times, oh, give me Samuel's ear, and a marvelous narrative around this passage. It mustn't become an idyllic, almost childhood story. It's adult stuff. When a boy responds to call, for call is fundamental to life and what it means. Our text does not invite us to merely examine this in a childlike way, but to consider voluntary work, our daily lives, and everything we do in some way as related to what it is that God is asking of us. Those who work within the confines of church life or in this great mission enterprise know that there are many, many things that are done over and above what paid employment can ever do. John Henry Newman was aware of God's call in his own life, but he wrote in such a way that gave people access to his wisdom concerning vocation in his own life. He wrote this: God has created me to do him some definite service. He has committed some work to me which has not been committed to another. I have my mission. I may never know it in all its fullness in this life, but I shall be told it in the next. I am a link in a chain, a bond in a connection between people. He has not created me for nothing. I shall do good. I shall do his work. I shall be an angel of peace, a preacher of truth in my own place, even if not intending it, if I do but do his commandments. I think what I get from a passage like that is that sense of purpose. And volunteering can be one way in which people understand purpose in their lives, understand distinct understanding of themselves and what it is we're meant to do. We must never forget that we're called to live daily as a vocation from God, offering ourselves to do whatever is good. Do you know, in the tradition that I come from, very much an evangelical preaching tradition, we're very careful that when we talk about doing good, but we are called to do good, We are called to do good. It will not save us. It will not bring about our redemption by itself, but we are called to do good. Saved to serve used to be the way that old preachers and people used to understand it. And I sometimes think because we don't want to rush into this false understanding of our salvation, that we forget that doing good is part of what it means to live out the Christian lives, to live out that way which is Jesus. A number of things about this volunteering. The spirit of volunteering is willingness. Samuel's credibility as a prophet does not lie in any conventional method, political or religious confirmation, but it's found in his willingness to respond to God's call in his life. And this willingness can be seen in a number of different ways. It can be understood, and I think this passage has been used many times as a pattern for some who talk about the classical call of the preacher, the missionary, or the prophet. But the call of need and the position of circumstance is so very, very important. Opportunities arise for us and we see the gaping hole and we say, who will go there? But we go, because that makes all the difference. And the stirring of desire in our hearts to somehow complete our lives by doing something that is outside of our own family circle, outside of our interests, outside of any paid employment, is natural to what it means to be a human being. We're called to do those things that are good. The recent bushfires demonstrated how important it is to be willing to put the priorities of the present aside for one moment for the priorities of greater needs. I'm so proud of the fact that a good number of our staff were out there volunteering with the firefighters. Absolutely right. That's how they see their lives lived out day by day. The changing patterns of employment, the longevity of people's lives are going to open up a whole new area of volunteering. There are people, last week when we had Wesley Fair, Carol and I decided we were going to invite some of the centenarians in our mission. And there were 2 and there were 3 others that could have come. Being 100 isn't what it used to be, No, people are sat there you're not sat there simply having a conversation with somebody who can't understand what you're talking about and you just keep the conversation going. No, engaging. Though at one point, one person did ask me if I was Mr. Raywood. No, I didn't know what to make of that one, really. But these are people who've got very, very only fond memories, but have got active lives. The length of people's lives, the fact that people are no longer going to be working in the way that they have traditionally done is going to open up whole new opportunities that, if not taken, will leave people kicking around doing nothing with their lives, and they need to be creative. So we need to respond to that need. And their gifts will make such an enormous difference to the work of the life that we do together here. Volunteering is ordinary people making an extraordinary contribution. It wasn't too long ago I heard from somebody talking about company volunteering and referring to it as a positive contribution. I took it as a threefold win: a win for the individual, a win for the company, and a win for the community. And if in some way we can stand in the middle of all that and broker, if you like, very positive things for our community, we make a great difference. Today we're talking more and more about social capital. I've been exploring with a group of people regarding an event in 2014 here in Australia, which is exploring exactly that theme. There is a whole welter of social capital that needs to be expended, measured, understood within our community. Our main concern must be to see what a person does rather than what a person gets. That's the measurement of citizenship. What a person contributes, not what they take out, not what they earn, not how they're seen by others, but what a difference they can make themselves. A contribution each day across our lovely country by volunteers. Just think about it in our communities. The working bees that tidy up centres, the school support, and so on and so on and so on. All expressed and given by volunteers. Volunteering adds quality to people's lives. There's a story of an older man, that was sat in a rocking chair on his deck, and an older woman came along, and though he looked weathered and feeble, he had a content smile on his face. She asked him, "What's the secret for your long and happy life?" His response, "Well, I smoke 3 packs of cigs every day. I drink a case of whiskey every week, and I eat all the fatty foods, and I never exercise." That's amazing. How old are you? He said, 26. You like that, didn't you? I think we have to really say, what is it about this volunteering that really contributes to human life? And it does. We can't promise that it's going to make you actually live longer. But what a difference it can make to the wholesome perception of people's lives. Jesus was no solo performer, even though he was and is the unique Son of God. His first course of action when he entered his own ministry was to gather a community of faithful disciples in employment, fishermen. Now, they were called from nets. They did fish from time to time. Don't push that too far. Calling people to follow him. And I find something fascinating in understanding that Jesus shared his ministry with others. That's so important about what it is that he's about. And to achieve, we need that spirit and offering of a willing spirit to him. Wesley Mission story couldn't be told historically without reference to our auxiliaries who built centres, who gathered together. Teams that have been important in the transformation of our work. Specific projects, one by one, that have been supported by people down the years. And all that has been achieved as people's hearts have been softened as they've offered a willing spirit. Secondly, the heart of volunteering is generous. In a different setting, I received a call from someone who asked the question of me. I just wanted to check out what the expenses are for volunteering. I just have a feeling that this person was starting at the wrong place. Because at the beginning of all volunteering is a soft heart given to God and given to people. That doesn't mean to say that sometimes you don't do things to make it possible for people to do something, but it begins in that offering to God. We are generous because we've received generously. We don't have to create generosity because we have received out of the generosity of God. The God who was rich, yet for our sakes became poor, so that we in our poverty might know his wealth. That Corinthian truth it strikes at the heart of the good news. We're generous because need releases a grasp on things. When you really begin to see the comparison of what we have, and you take a glance at your news programs and you look at those villages and cities and towns in the Philippines, and you can't help but thinking, that really can't keep tight hands. They must be open. And we're generous because we find ourselves fulfilled in doing it. The work we do couldn't be achieved without such a commitment. There's a legend, and it is a legend, of course, but it has a strong message in it. It concerns a boy who gave his 5 barley loaves and 2 fishes so that Jesus could feed the multitude. It tells how he ran home after the event and was so excited and telling the whole story to his mom. And he did. The wonderful miracle kept running through his mind, made even richer by the fact that all the fragments were gathered up, and there seemed to be far more fragments than ever he'd seen in his life, let alone from what he offered. His eyes were big with wonder. His pupils, no doubt, were dilated as he talked to his mother. And he said to her, after telling how the Saviour had taken what he'd offered, "I wonder, Mum, if it would be that way with everything we gave to him." And in the legend there is a truth. It is that way with everything we give to him. What we offer to him, he multiplies and does over and above anything we ask or think according to his Spirit. That's what he does with what we offer. And when we offer it in that way. In the wonderful gospel story of the widow who gave her all, we hear the conclusion of Jesus when he said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They gave out of their wealth, but she gave out of her poverty, put in everything." And here's the powerful words, all that she had to live on. It was Flint who wrote, one of the most difficult things to give away is kindness, because it usually gets returned. Generosity creates a context in which volunteering becomes natural. Samuel heard God's call and then eventually knew what it was to respond. And this is the pattern of our lives. We're not all called to be prophets and preachers and politicians, but using what we have for God's glory is a clue to a wholesome life. Generosity is much more than giving money and sharing resources. It's giving time. I had a man who was a very, very wealthy man in a congregation, and not everybody was by any means wealthy in that congregation. And we used to have our times when we were building extensions and doing things, and we called for volunteers to come. And whenever we did that, I used to get the 2 or 3 heavy notes given to me to buy resources to see everything was all right for the volunteering day. But I knew when we'd made the breakthrough, when he came down to lift the bricks, because I knew the hours cost money, and I knew the time was the greatest gift to him. Not to simply give off the top, but to give from the heart. To give from the heart in a way that made a fundamental difference. Generosity is much more than giving in that way. And then thirdly and finally, the need for volunteers is continuous. The needs of our community are changing rapidly. And we need to see some of the traditional models altering rapidly to meet the need of that changing community. Samuel would soon discover that his message would need to be strong, and it would be linked to a message about the judgment of God. But there's continuity at the center of everything. You'll see I have before you, it's a continuous call for more help. It's a continuous call for new help. And it's a continuous call for your help. That we offer ourselves in a real and meaningful way. As I begin to draw to a close, I want to tell you a story. I don't think this story is actually true. It's the story about a camel. The camel was very young and confused. And the camel was a talking camel. I really don't think this is a true story. And the camel said, Why do I have such big feet? Oh, said the older camel, God gave you big flat feet so that you could run easily through the desert sands. And why, said the young camel to the older camel, why do I have long skinny legs? Oh, those long skinny legs are given to you so that you don't sink into the desert sands. And said the young camel, why do I have these large eyelashes? Oh, and the older camel said, that's so that the sand doesn't actually get into your eyes during the desert storms. And what, said the young camel, is this huge lump doing on my back? That's very useful. God made it so that you don't get thirsty on long desert journeys. So tell me then, with that special earnestness, he looked into the older camel's eye, why am I in a zoo? I think that the way we understand what we do needs to be in a context. Outside of that context, it's mere story. And volunteering has a context appropriate to a person. When Samuel heard the voice of God and ran to Eli, Eli told him what to do. Go lie down as you usually do. And then if you hear the voice of God, tell him that you're ready to respond. And Samuel's ministry, as you turn the pages of 1 Samuel, you'll be excited to see this boy become the man prophet as he responded to God's call. Our Christian witness is to be represented in many areas of day-to-day life. It can be a challenge to people when considering retirement. I read of a man who frequently complained in his later years of paid employment that he had so many interests outside of work that he had no time to go to the office. Now, that's the right attitude. Then that nonsense I hear sometimes of people who say when they've retired, no, I don't know why I ever worked, I'm so busy and all the rest of it. Sometimes because they're not. Don't practice volunteering when you've retired. Live volunteering all your life, and then it becomes natural when you retire. That old Methodist way of working, which is to give yourself, I know some of it people get very frustrated about, but to be given to a cause, to have a passion, to have a fire, to give yourself because you believe that your life is but a gift from God to be used for him. And so when Samuel heard the voice of God, it was to do something that is always the heart of the truth of our service. That we're here to hear his voice, we're here to do his will, and we're here to make a difference to this world that is his world. The calling to be a volunteer can come in that blinding moment of revelation. It sometimes comes from a quiet nudge of the Spirit. But however it comes, make sure you're not busy doing something for yourself. But you can't respond and do something for God and others.